enjoyed the last time, and I'm glad to be back for another one. Is our buddy going to be on here? Is he a special guest? Is Mario going to make an appearance, or is he out snowblowing?
Who knows what he's up to? If he does show up, or if he does text me, and if you are watching Mario Mancini, you're more than welcome. Even though it's not the Mancini show tonight, but it's always Mancini show on Cheap Heat Productions. The man that brings the views, Mario Mancini.
The draw, Mario Mancini. Yes,
the man that's debuted more superstars than anybody.
Absolutely. Brian, I thought we'd begin tonight with a deep cut in terms of your career. Those fans of a certain vintage fondly recall the AWA and the national television deal that they had with ESPN, the Total Sports Network, and just wanted to know how you got booked. Actually, a two-part question. How you started working for Vern in the AWA, and whether or not you encountered in an announcer capacity a young Eric Bischoff.
Well, I got booked from Vern. At that time I was working the WWA territory, which was owned and ran by Dick the Bruiser and Wilbur Snyder, and then Wilbur Snyder retired and Bruiser bought him out. And then I was working exclusively for Dick. And then, of course, he still had some dealings, with Vern, and they got co-ran like Chicago and all that stuff, and had the opportunity from him, like, hey, you want to go up and work for Vern on some shows and all that stuff. So he kind of like sent me up there, and went up there from that. Bischoff, I never saw him, never once. I don't know if, I'm assuming back then he might have been like, behind the scenes at like in the Minneapolis office and all that stuff. He was still there. I never once did I remember seeing him at Las Vegas when we used to do the TV at Showboat.
Just to add on to that question, a lot of fans, myself included, remember that that syndicated program that emanated out of the Showboat Sports Pavilion with Larry Nelson, the now iconic voice of the AWA at the time. What do you recall in terms of that venue in particular that saw so many great matches?
I mean, it was it was basically a showroom, ballroom, or whatever that they had it there, which was kind of, if you want to say, old school to a point, because they put us up there and all that, and we come down and go into the thing, and then one dressing room was on one side, and the other dressing room was on the other side. So back then, it was like the old school. You couldn't talk to the guys because you're on each end, so you had to relay the stuff basically through the referee and all that stuff. Like, okay, here's what he wants to do, this, that. And okay, how about that? And then once you got in the ring, a lot of times it was called in the ring ad lib, because you could never discuss the stuff, like whether when we were in WWF or WCW, where you're all together and it's like, okay, here's our match, whatever. What do you want to do tonight? Da 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 da. This one was all kind of like going back and forth or whatever, and basically, in a sense, like I said, the old school formality of relaying the what you're going to do back and forth to the referees, and then basically it's kind of going out there and calling it in the ring.
Awesome.
Brian, I just have a question. You've been asked this a million times, but I'm going to ask you: how did you end up working for the biggest wrestling company in the world, the WWF?
That one, same thing. I was working for Gagne, and of course, everybody was jumping, and a couple people, hey, you need to, call WWF, and I got Terry Garvin's number, and called him or whatever, and he was just like, how long you been working, where you been working, da 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 da, and he just said, okay, hey, we're doing TV and da 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 da, show up there. And then that basically went there, got some matches. Obviously, kind of liked what they saw. I mean, was one of the guys that could work. So after that, I mean, I was getting, bookings from doing house shows and then other TVs along the way and all that stuff. But that was just one thing of calling, Garvin, and like everything else, I'm sure, even like Mario saying that. I mean, even though Mario was up there and he had his foot in there a little bit farther than I, even though he says he doesn't, but he had a little bit more clout where. But then it's like every week call Terry, hey, what do you got for me, whatever. Or sometimes it'd be you show up for TV and it's like, hey, can you make this show, and then they give you the stuff or whatever and all that, and otherwise, it was nothing there. Hey, call me next week or whatever, and I'll see if there's anything available. And he would give me my bookings then.
One of the crossovers that you worked in the AWA as well as WWF, and I'll get into the who's who of tag teams that you faced in your career, but one of them were the Midnight Rockers in the AWA, of course, Michaels and Jannetty, and then of course the Rockers in the WWF. What was your experience like sharing the ring with those two revolutionary workers at the time?
It was always fun. That's why I said I worked them countless times in the AWA, and then when we went to W, I mean, it was like riding a bike. It's like, oh, it's Marty and Sean or whatever. So you knew what to expect. Never had a problem with either one of them. They worked great with me and all that stuff. Now, granted, there was a few times, and I remember one. I want to say it was one of the times we were up in Canada. It might have been Saskatchewan or I think it's Regina, and we were working a tag match, and I had some. It was a newer kid was my partner, and we're doing the stuff, and I tag out and whatever, and work with Sean or Marty, and then take him in there, and it was towards the end, and they were taking the finish on him or whatever. And I'm on the outside and Marty's on the outside, and Marty starts laughing and looking at me and shaking his head. And I'm like, and he's kind of like motioning, like, watch this. And I'm like, no, don't. And I mean, Sean did the super kick, and I mean, literally took the kid's head off. And I just dropped my head like, guys, that, and Marty's over there kind of like snickering, like, watch it. It's like, but that was kind of like the, somewhat the initiation. Well, we got a new kid in here and all that stuff. And, we're going to work with you, but he's going to take the abuse. And I mean, it was one of those, it was definitely sweet chin music.
Were you surprised when that horrific injury took place with Jannetty and Michaels against the Austin individual? Were you surprised? Did they have a reputation for being rough?
No. And it was, and it's like, and me and Marty, we talked about that a few times, and we met up when he's actually worked for me a few times and all that. And I've even taken that bump. It's an easy bump. Granted, things happen, but then, from all the stuff I gather and heard, I mean, the kid wasn't as experienced as he said he was. And, sometimes you take a move and they tell you, hey, don't do this or don't move this way. And the kid kind of did. And that's what happened, whatever, the kid broke his neck. Now, granted, to a point where I don't know if they really at the time thought he was really hurt. That, that's a thing too, where, there's always that, sign, or you tell them like, hey, I'm injured or I'm hurt, you let the guy know or whatever. Being new and kind of not experienced, he might not have said anything to him. So that's why they can kind of like continued with the match and did like the double drop or whatever on that. Cause they, I don't know if they really were sure that the kid was serious. And then, and then I remember, then they had the lawsuit and all that. And I guess they, kind of like settled out, but they kind of went after, I guess Marty more than the tag team or whatever and all that, because he was the one that executed the move. But it was something unfortunate. But then again, there's been a lot of times, a lot of guys, and I don't fault them to a point where people have that that dream, that goal. They want to be a pro wrestler and they might not have the experience, but yet they kind of like fib, lie, all that stuff to get their foot in the door. And then there's some of the guys, I mean, and it was to a point, you know, in the WWF where, you know, like when we did TV a lot of times, you know, and there were some guys and some of them were my, you know, close personal friends, and they were, you know, brutally honest going, you know, hey, you know, I'm not going to give you a lot or whatever. I'm going to be eating you up. You know, it's nothing personal. It's, you know, Vince or Pat is coming down on me or whatever and all that. So we kind of like knew that going in that it was going to be kind of like snug and stiff or whatever and all that stuff, but you knew that. And then, you know, they were appreciative just of, hey, you know, you made me look like $1 million, and granted that was our job or whatever. And then there was other ones that, you know, kids just didn't sell right, didn't bump right, and then some of those guys would actually take more liberties. And there were some guys that, you know, I mean, a lot of times, you know, people still, you know, like the Steiner brothers, you know, and I worked them probably half a dozen times, a lot of times with Barry Horowitz. But the thing was, yeah, were they stiff and snug with us? Yeah, but that's the way they worked. But they didn't take liberties with us because one of the things they knew we could work. They knew that we could bump and all that stuff and all that. But again, were they snug and all that? Yeah. But you knew what you were expecting on that one. Where I saw other ones where, you know, yeah, they were, you know, you know, way before the Brock Lesnar's and all. You talk about Suplex City and all that stuff. They would just, you know, bounce guys on their heads and throw them around. They had no regard for their body. Just figured, you know, these guys shouldn't even be in here. I mean, we did one television, and I forget, excuse me, it might have been in Toledo or something like that, and they had like 2 guys out there, and they were wrestling the Steiners, and the match was just a shit from the get-go. And this was back when we used to do television. We did them like the TV tapings like 3 in a row in that night. So we did, you know, there'd be, you know, 50, 60 matches or whatever, but it was for, you know, 3 weeks in a row. So the match was horrible. Steiners came back with her. Vince was ballistic. You know, that match sucked, blah, 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 blah. We're doing it again. You know, get me some guys that can work. And they set like another match out there or whatever. And next thing you know, it's like, you know, Costello, Horowitz, come here. And we were up and we went out, and the Steiners just went in previous. And then here we come again, which, you know, was tape television. So they just, you know, edited that, deleted that. That match was never seen before. And of course, people at home don't know that, but the people at the arena are like, well, then we just saw these guys. Well, here comes, you know, me and Barry out there to take on the Steiner brothers. And we went out there and had a decent match with them where they actually looked good and all that stuff. So they did that one. So things like that happen, you know, and they were, you know, that's one of the things that was really fun. I mean, back in the day, like when we used to do the taping before we went to the live ones, I was working Scott Hall when he was doing Razor Ramon. And I knew Scott from the AWA. So, and actually I was pretty good friends with him in the WWF. He treated me nice and all that. And a couple times we went out drinking and all that. And I knew when to leave, unlike him. But we were doing a match or whatever, and he always did that big bolo punch at the end, you know, where he kind of set your chin or whatever and all that. And he's like, okay, take the big bump. And I'm like, okay, Scott. And he went around and spun and hit me. And I just stood there and went like, and you just look at him like, oh, shit, come on. I'm like, nope, not going to do it. I just kind of like pissed off. He's like, come on, please take the bump. And I'm like, all right, give it to me again. Well, back then they could edit it out and snip it. So he did it again, and I took a big bump or whatever and all that. And we got back and goes, you bastard. I'm like, I'm just screwing with you, Scott, or whatever. So I made him like actually work on that one because I wouldn't sell his first bolo punch. And, you know, some of those times you could do that with some guys and have some fun and all that. And it was enjoyable.
I watched a match of yours earlier from 1987 with Jake Roberts. And after the match, he puts the snake on top of your face. Is that something that you can practice? Like, did you guys go through what was going to happen? Obviously, you've probably had the snake on your face a few times, but talk to me about that process of planning that.
all I would do, and I enjoy it. I love working Jake. Worked him a bunch of times. Always, to me, it was always a night off. I just asked him which snake they got, because he'd have either a boa or a python, and the python would bite, and the boa wouldn't. It just depends on how temperamental and how Jake was treating him or whatever and all that. And that's all I would say is just which one you got, whatever. You got the boa or the python. And other than that, I never worried about it. There was one time we did a match. It used to be on YouTube. I think they took it down at one point or whatever, all that. But it was one time and he just decided, he goes, do you have a problem? No. He actually took the bag and put my head in the bag and wrapped it around there. So the snake is in there, and it's just over my head. And he's shaking it and all that. And the snake wasn't doing anything. It was just rolling around. It wasn't, And then, we did it, and then he pops the bag out, and it goes, all over and all that. And I got back to the back, and guys are like, oh, my God, you're nuts. Why'd you let him put your head in the bag or whatever and all that? What if that snake bit you and all that? I got, well, I told it was the boa, it wasn't the python, so I wasn't worried. I said, if it did bit me, you see me pop out of the mat real quick or whatever, stomping on that thing or whatever. But it never happened. Never had to worry about it. I know some guys were really definitely afraid of it. But I never worried about it.
Any backstage incidents with the snake ever?
Oh yeah. Well, he always used to. I said there was a lot of guys that were just definitely afraid of it. And I remember one time we were wrestling in Indianapolis at the old Market Square Arena, and he used to always throw it in the shower, turn the water on, and the snake would just be playing around in the water and all that stuff. And I think it was Jose Rivera or Jose Estrada maybe. Was on and in there, the showers was like over here and the toilets were over there. And he was in the toilet doing his business. And the snake decided to wander. And he's sitting there like reading a newspaper or something like that, relaxing, kind of looks down. Next thing he knows, he sees a snake head kind of peer up at him and all that, and
oh God,
maybe wink at him, and you hear ah, and he's running out of the stall. So stuff like that happened. It was just this snake was just exploring.
That's tremendous. One of the individuals that you worked in the AWA and WWF was Mr. Magnificent Kevin Kelly, who of course went on to become Nails in the WWF. Did you find him to be a volatile individual, or were you absolutely surprised when the incident with Mr. McMahon came out to the wrestling folks?
No, Kevin was always good to work with. I know when we worked in the AWA, I would say he was still kind of like green and all that stuff. So, there was a lot of times you might have to take control of the match and still make him look good or whatever. He just wasn't that, he wasn't a seasoned worker and all that stuff. And still stiff. But not on purpose. He he wasn't a good worker. And so you knew that. But that one, because actually, and the funny thing is, he's back in the day when then he started doing independence. He's worked for me like 2 or 3 times, and I even had to wrestle him on my own show. And it's just like, and it was almost like, yeah. And I knew what it was going to be like. He was still the same, and he was doing the Nails character, and he was still stiff, and just like listen to me and all that, and and do this, do that, and all that, and. So, I always got along with him. I even had one show where I booked, and I booked him against Greg Valentine. And then Greg comes up to me and goes, why'd you put me against that stiff prick? Because everybody knew he was just hard to work with. And it wasn't on purpose. He didn't try to hurt you. He just wasn't that great a worker. So, when that happened or whatever, I mean, I think there's more to it than what it is. There's, he's saying that, Vince grabbed him and all that. I don't know. I think it's somewhere along the line of too money involved, or, wasn't getting what he was guaranteed or promised or something. And that kind of like nobody really knows except for 2 or 3 guys that were actually there what happened. But, did he kind of grab a hold of Vince or whatever and choke him? Yeah. I mean, I think he was just fed up with. I mean, there's a lot of guys I think would like to do that at the time.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, have you heard of anybody backstage besides, I mean, that story is sort of ubiquitous, but have you heard of anybody else that kind of, I don't want to say assaulted, but got in Vince's face in an aggressive manner? Because he seems to stand out in that respect.
No, I don't. I mean, there might have been like shouting matches between guys, in the behind closed doors meetings or whatever, with what was guaranteed, what was promised. Hey, you told me you're going to do this with me, that, and then guys would get fed up and maybe give their notice and leave or something like that. But as far as assault, I mean, the only 2 I hate to say that really about is Nails and Bret Hart. The two that basically took a swing and contacted with him.
Brian, I'd like to talk about some of the tag team partners you've had over the years, and who would you pick as some of your favorite partners? One that stood out to me was a man that we had on the show here before, the Dublin Destroyer, Brian Donahue. Did they put you 2 guys together because you both wore green, or what was the story of you 2 guys being together?
They might have on that one. I wish they would have did something with us or whatever, because we both had that, kind of like that same outfit. We were only partners a couple times. I know Sandy Beach. I partnered with him a couple times. Barry Horowitz a lot. Dusty Wolf a lot. Reno Riggins had him as a partner. And then those were kind of like the main ones. A lot of times the guys, Gino Carabello, those maybe 5 or 6 guys were the most of the time. And then sometimes it was just like one-hit wonders. This is the guy or whatever, and and sometimes depending on who you're going to work, it's like, hey, this guy's going to take, he's going to take all the pounding and abuse, and then maybe we're going to catch the finish on you because we know you can do it right, and all that stuff. So, and then sometimes it wasn't even that; they just do the finish on that one or whatever. I forget the guy's name. It was a big kid or whatever. I mean, we were working like Road Warriors or whatever and all that. And I remember, Hawk and Animal kind of looking like, I think we're taking the finish on you. I don't think they thought they could get that big guy up or whatever. Like, no problem and all that. So, and that was nothing. I mean, it was basically doing a backflip off of Animal's shoulder. I mean, it was, he had a hold of you, and as soon as Hawk would almost like touch or whatever, he just kind of give you that, and you just take that backflip back. So it was nothing to it.
A lot of fans, Brian, still talk about and remember that famous incident that you had in the ring on Superstars in '88 with Andre the Giant. Can you talk about how that came together and your relationship with him?
That one, I said, it was setting up the feud with Andre and Hacksaw, and I know Pat just grabbed and said, "Hey, come with me," whatever. I'm like, okay. It's like, you're working with the boss. I'm like, and he's sitting there playing cribbage or something like that or whatever and all that. And like, okay. And there was really nothing said or whatever and all that. It's like, because Andre knew me, I said, from times where I used to have to go get his liquor for him and all that stuff. And it was, went out there and he's just like, just listen to me, boss. And I'm like, okay. And he grabbed me from the thing. I said, did those headbutts or whatever and all that stuff. And then before the bell rang, and then tossed me out. And even on that one, like I said, it was one of those things where, you heard stories where, he didn't like, like Savage or sometimes even Jake or Iron Sheik and stuff, where, he'd be a little rough on them. It was night off. He did, his headbutts, never felt one. And it looked like he was just taking my head off and all that stuff. And easy night. And I mean, that was it or whatever and all that, and enjoyed it. I mean, like I said, and not a lot of people got a chance to really work with him. Most of the time, I mean, it was main eventers, whether it was house shows or even TV setting up a thing. So it was a privilege to work with him, and yet that in the record books, I got the win over him.
Great.
What was it like being around Hulk Hogan? How was he perceived in the dressing room? Because a lot of people say
I
he's
had a couple
outstanding
runs
guy.
to see him or whatever, say hi or whatever. Not, I mean, most of the time he was, off in his own dressing room, like the big stars at that time. The champions had their own room or whatever and all that. I mean, he wasn't like snobbish or whatever. I mean, he would say hi to you or whatever and all that stuff. I mean, I never really had any talks with him or whatever. The only time really was, I think we were in Omaha doing TV or whatever, and there was a bunch of us dressing in the dressing room, and he was in there, and a bunch of the boys decided to partake in some let's say funny cigarettes, and I remember him coming up like, "Hey, watch the door. Holler at us if somebody like one of the agents would come in here and all that stuff." And because I was getting dressed towards the door and all that stuff, and did that or whatever and all that. And I think at the one time Pat was getting ready to come in there and like boom, like guys, kayfabe, and the next thing and then Pat comes in there and there's like a big smoke cloud of what the hell is going on? And it was like, what are you talking about? What, it was all gone and all that stuff. But I mean, he was nice or whatever and all that. I mean, I never had any problems where we're to a point where he snubbed me or was too good to talk or whatever. I mean, a lot of times he was busy doing other stuff because I mean, he was the face of the company. He was carrying the company and all that. I mean, that was the time too when he was champion. We were running 3 towns a night, and we were running. Basically, I mean, we did TV like Mondays and Tuesdays, but Wednesday through Sunday, we were running live shows. And twice on Saturday and twice on Sunday. So, and at that time, like I said, they had 3 towns a night going. They basically had an A squad, a B squad, and a C squad. And you always really wanted to try to, you loved to be on the A squad because usually that was Hogan in some place. And then, your pay was a little bit higher on his, but they'd usually have him there, and maybe whoever was Intercontinental Champion might be on the B one, and then maybe a Tag Team Champion was on the C one, and all that to give people something to see.
Got a timely fan question from Ibzan. He's asking, how stiff was the Texas Tornado Carrie Von Eric like in the ring? And of course, Von Erich's have a lot of spotlight on them with the release of that Iron Claw movie in December that I personally enjoyed. But what about Carrie during that late tenure of his career?
I worked Carrie a couple of times, and I remember the first time, and he was on that one. He was never stiff, even with his this bolo punch and all that. The funny thing, or I hate to say the sad thing was, I remember the first time I worked him. We were doing a television match, and actually it was. And I think that one still might be on YouTube or whatever and all that. We went over the match, and I think we had maybe 4 minutes or something like that, 3.5, 4 minutes, which is actually a long time for TV or whatever. And we sat down and we went over our match. And the premise, it was a good match, what we went over and all that stuff. And I go out there first, and Danny Davis was our referee. And that time was like, and I'm out there about ready and all that, and he's like, "Who you working?" And I go, "Carrie." And he just shook his head and he goes, "Oh boy." I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "He won't remember a freaking thing about the match." And I'm like, "Get out of here." He goes, "Nope." And here comes Carrie doing his thing, blah, 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 blah. And we went and did the lockup, and he goes, "What are we doing?" He had no clue. And we just went over our match in the back of what we were going to do. And through the whole match, it was just kind of like calling the spots left and right. He just completely forgot whatever we did. And that was just a sign, I mean, to what of just the drugs that his mind was so fried that, I mean, he was a nice kid. I mean, good worker and all that. And that was back still when he had, the leg thing where, a lot of people didn't know that. But I was kind of shocked to a point where, I really didn't believe Danny until we went locked up and he's like, what are we doing? And he just completely blank.
Hmm.
But no, to me, he wasn't stiff, not at all.
What's your thoughts on? I know you worked Virgil, and he's got an interesting demeanor even to this day. Was he always kind of the same? And
Yeah,
of course, we wish him well. He's gone through some health problems at the moment as well.
yeah, and actually, it was. I mean, he's another guy too. At the time, I got along with him fine. He always thought he was like, I hate to say, on the level of, Hulk Hogan, Ted DiBiase, Macho, and it's like, dude, you're not, and that's what he thought he was. He's another one too. You'll go out there and what if it's a TV match, the guy's planning 40 spots. It's like, dude, we're out there for 2.5 minutes. And you ain't going to remember half of them. You're like, oh, like, no, you're not. We're going to do like 4. And he was, and if it was a house show too or something, he'd do, but he just thought, he was like a great worker and all that stuff. And he was just, he lived off of Ted's fame and all that, being the bodyguard. I mean, he wasn't a horrible worker, but he wasn't a great worker either, And there was a time then after he left and he was done with New York and WCW and all that. And actually, I had him in on a couple of shows and then I booked him for a buddy of mine, which he still never lets me forget about it. He was such a pain in the butt because, he was just kind of like ridiculing the guys and looking down on them and all that. And he's like, when I sold out Madison Square Garden and the Boston Garden, the Spectrum, and it's like, and then guys are just kind of like in shock and they didn't know what to say. And I had to like, Virgil, shut the F up. You didn't sell it out. It was Hogan and Ted, and he just kind of like be quiet and clam up. Is like, dude, it's like, you got to be respectful to these other guys. These guys are trying to climb the ladder. You were there and now you're doing independence. So don't degrade him to a point. And now I said, yeah, now he's having health problems and went through some, crisis. And then we all know the story of, hey, you want an autograph picture? I'll sell you an autograph picture, where you're selling those. But I got along with him okay, but I said he thought he was a bigger star than he actually was. Which, I mean, some of those guys were like that. I mean, there was a few guys when, we'd go like, television matches, like, they want to do 40 spots. And it's like, guys, we're out there for 3 minutes. It's bing, bang, boom. Now, granted, if you had some workers that, even in 3 minutes, whatever, you could do and have a good match and tell a story, whether, it was Perfect or Jake or even Hexa. But then there's other ones that, they wanted to, resurrect the Ricky Dragon Steamboat and Ric Flair match out there. And it's like, guys, we got 3 minutes and you're not that good.
One of the interesting features of your career that I noticed doing research was they put you with Outback Jack in '88 several times, which must have been in hindsight, a vote of confidence in your abilities. Did you have any special instructions with this guy, given those of us that can remember that monster push they had in mind with him?
I think Jack, nobody wanted to work with. I was like married to him for like a week one time. It's like, and I mean, we had decent matches and all that stuff, and it was fun working with him. I mean, and we all know the stories of how they, he was abused and all that, and the guys picked on him. I mean, I went out there and worked with him, and I can't really say anything bad about, another one. Super nice guy, really nice guy. Was he a great worker? No. But, you sometimes it's the other person that's got to make him look like $1 million and a star. And, I hate to say, that, and I'm nowhere do I compare myself, but it's kind of like Ric Flair when he was world champion. he'd go around all these different towns when the NWA, and sometimes, you know, they'd have to have their top guy, and maybe he wasn't it or whatever, and say, hey, we don't want our champion getting beat, but, you know, and Flair had to carry him like for an hour or something like that, and sometimes you just have to carry the match and have a good match or respectable match out of it. Another one, and I loved him to death, and I worked on a bunch. Was like Hillbilly Jim was another one. We had some great matches. He wasn't a great worker, but we could have some fun and do some stuff and get the people riled up, and by just doing the littlest stuff or whatever. And he worked with it because he knew. I mean, again, you know, he knew he wasn't a Ricky Steamboat or Randy Savage, and he was going to do kind of like the comedy act and you sell and bump or whatever. But yeah, he'll give you, you know, the time or whatever to get your comeback or get heat and all that stuff. And it was fun. And Outback was the same way. I mean, you know, Jim was a lot better worker than him, but I think that, again, it was just kind of like, they're almost like, oh God, we got to put him on the card, but who do we put him with? And a lot of guys just didn't want to work with him just because you knew to a point the match was going to be the shits, and you just had to make the best out of it.
Were you aware that they had big plans for him on the whole Crocodile Dundee
Oh yeah,
thing?
they went off of the, you know, the Crocodile Dundee and all, and I think it just you know, a fart in church. It's just like and people just didn't, you know, and they just, you know, it ran its course or whatever, and then they got rid of him and all that stuff, you know. But again, super nice guy.
Steve Kern kind of became the new Crocodile Dundee then, didn't he, down the road?
Yeah, but see, there you take a guy that, you know, and he did that savage type thing or whatever, but Steve could work. Steve was a hell of a worker, you know, from, you know, his early days in Florida to where the Fabulous Ones and all that stuff. So, I mean, he was just kind of like, that was a time where, you know, guys with gimmicks, you know, we got to give a guy a gimmick or whatever instead of putting, you know, I hate to say, you know, that's kind of like, you know, instead of bringing Harley Race up there as a, you know, 8-time world champion who could, you know, work, they made him, you know, King Harley Race and all that stuff, and kind of like saddled him with that gimmick and all that. And I mean, I know at the time, which is kind of ironic at the time, when AWA went out, you know, there was talk about bringing Nick Bockwinkel in there, but Vince didn't want him because he thought he was too old at that time. And it's just like, he could still, at that time, if he would have came in there, outworked half the guys in the company because he was that good a worker. But Vince is like, oh, he's too old to be in here. So he came in as an agent. Go ahead.
Do you think, Brian, that of all the kind of quote unquote enhancement guys that came into the company, that probably Steve Lombardi, the Brooklyn Brawler, was the only one that kind of outlasted into the 90s and got somewhat of a push? Why do you think that was?
Well, we know why that was, so I won't go into it. He was friends with a couple of guys in the office that, you know, I'm sure Mario.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Mario has, you know, he's mentioned that a few times and all that. I mean, Lombardi was another one. I tagged him with him a few times. Never had a problem with Steve and all that. I always got along with him. But yeah, that was. Did I see that personally? No. Do I know that? You know, that's just the rumors going around that he was personal friends with some of the guys in the office or whatever, and that's why he, you know, lasted so long and all that stuff. So, and again, everybody has a choice in their thing or whatever. And if he did do what they say, I hate to say, you know, God bless him. That was his choice. You know, some guys just said, no, I'm not, you know, on that one. But I will say, a couple times said working with him as partner, he was great to work with. I know the one time, which me and him worked Men on a Mission, and that was god awful. And there's, you know, two guys too that couldn't work, especially Mabel. He was just horrible. And he did that, and they used to tell him whatever and all that, and they tried to get him away from it, but he used to do that flying spinning kick. And that was one of the ones he did it. And he did it on me, and he's supposed to hit you in the chest with it. Well, he hit me across the face or whatever with it. Split my eye open and all that stuff. And I remember it laying in the ring or whatever after the thing, and Lombardi was like, oh, look, you know, and I'm like, is it really coming down? He goes, yeah. I'm like, because I could feel it or whatever. But you know, we came back or whatever, and even first one I see back there was Pat Patterson, and he just went like, oh, and just went and just ripped him a new one. It's like, dude, you can't be out there killing our guys. Well, I didn't. It's like, dude, you're doing it all the time, and it was like, you know, especially like workers. And I know Pat was really upset with it that time or whatever, that, you know, that he split me open.
When you talk about the workers, and obviously we talk about Barry Horowitz not getting the push that he deserved, is there anyone that you think is within that bracket that should have lasted longer in the business as well?
Well, I mean, Lombardi got a push, was in there for a long time. Barry definitely should have. They should have did more with him. And you know, and there was guys that came and went. I mean, you know, Brady Boone was a good worker when it was there. You know, and then they gave him that Battle Cat gimmick, and that kind of like fizzled to a point. I'm trying to think what the kid was. It was down in Texas and Florida. Al Perez, maybe that might have been one.
Oh yeah. Al Perez with Gary Hart in the NWA was.
No, he was up there, and I think they gave him some another one that, you know. But that was the thing too at the time when guys came in there. Vince had to give him a gimmick, you know. So I mean, there was a lot of guys that came through there, and they're to me, they were stars in other territories and came up there and did okay, but maybe never reached that stardom just because they had a goofy gimmick and all that. And you know, we all know, you know, Terry Taylor and the Red Rooster. We know that, you know, and I worked Terry a few times. Whatever. I know I worked him the one time when he came back. He had just had knee surgery, and actually, he wasn't really healthy enough to come back, but I guess they told him, like, hey, you need to get back there, otherwise, you know, we're going to pink slip you. And we were working a television match, and he was scared to death because his knee wasn't completely healed. He could hardly move in the ring, and I just, you know, and I said, Terry, I got you. I said, just do very little. I will cover for you. I'll take the bumps and all that stuff, and we did the stuff, and you couldn't really notice because he had a hard time even getting to the ring, coming up the stairs and all that. But we did, you know, but he was just in fear for his job and all that because they made him come back sooner or whatever and all that. And but there's not, you know, he was a heck of a worker, but he had to do. They gave him that goofy gimmick.
In terms of another vote of confidence from the office in your work, I remember you working Dusty Rhodes on Challenge in '89, shortly after his jump from JCP, and Dusty not being what he was, say, you know, 5-8 years ago. From that, I'm just wondering how, given the fact that he was Dusty Rhodes, how you went into that match knowing that, of course, they were going to push him.
Yeah, you know, that's a fun one, Jack. And that's one of few. I had to go back and look. Yeah, I worked him. I don't remember working him. So I don't think it was that memorable for me on that one. I don't remember. And there, I mean, again, I've worked so many guys or whatever when they came through there and all that. I can't. On that one, I can't really answer, say, hey, it was a good match, it was a crappy match. I don't remember working him, but I do say, oh, yeah, you know, there's things out there, yeah, you worked him, like, oh, okay. It wasn't memorable on that one where you can say this guy, oh, yeah, I wrestled that one, this one, that one. But he's one of the ones that I guess it was just a phase in there that, but again, you know, that was, you know, Vince's deal of, you know, with the polka dots and kind of make, you know, I mean, here's another one. He would, you know, a heck of a worker, a big star and all that, who, it's funny, who had great matches back in the 70s working for the old man, you know, and who was a big star in the Mecca Madison Square Garden with, you know, great matches like with Superstar Billy Graham. And then you bring him back in later who, you know, when he was the booker for the NWA and going against you, and you saddle him up with that kind of. But Dusty was a professional and made the best of it and got over because of who he was and his charisma.
Well, I remember the match, and you took the bionic elbow like $1 million. So
there you go. So I mean, it's like I said, but that honestly, I do not remember it. But I have seen like, oh yeah, you worked him. Like, oh okay. And there's some too. There's some I don't even want to remember. You know, I mean, he was a nice guy too. I remember like like Joe LeDuc. I worked him. That that was another one that was kind of like a horrible match, but I worked him. But there's just some guys you want to forget.
Do you remember working the Big Boss Man as the guardian angel in WCW?
Yeah, on that one, because when I was down there, I did a half dozen or so matches. And again, Ray was great. I worked him when he was a boss man in New York, so that was a night off. I mean, I remember some of the guys I worked. I know I worked Eric Watts down there. I worked Bossman as guardian angel. I worked Pillman. Vader, yeah. Well, we know the story on that one. That's that. Don't get me going on that one, Jack. We already did the last one. Piece of crap. But I mean, for the most part, I had good experience working guys down there. Harlem Heat, Steven Regal. Had a fun match with him and all that stuff, and and he'd take me to the brink of almost stretching me, but then he wouldn't, and then it's just kind of like chuckle in my ear and all that, like, oh, you're pretty flexible there, so but we had fun or whatever and all that stuff to where it was enjoyable. The only one I didn't, like I said, was and that's I said we did I did the tag team match when the NWO was doing their stuff and worked Hall and Nash again down there, which and had that discussion with Kevin, and who was super great about it or whatever, like, oh, I'm gonna give you the power bomb. It's just kind of, I was hesitant and whatever. It's like, what? I go, and then we had to talk. I go, well, last time I said Vader did that, and he even said, he goes, well, Vader's a piece of shit. He doesn't know how to do it. He goes, I'm just going to lift you up and release you, and you're going to take the fall and the bump yourself. He goes, I'm not going to drive you to the mat or anything like that. He goes, I'm just going to lift you up and let go, and that's exactly what it was. Where when Vader did it, he tried to drive you right through the ring.
What was the main difference for you between working in WWF and WCW? What were the notable differences in the locker room?
Oh, I mean, it's just, I guess just the professionalism. I mean, it was like night and day. It was like, I hate to say big league, AAA, to a point where, I mean, even though you had some of the same stars and all that, just the way the product was ran, how it was ran, the production of it or whatever, you kind of like, or who's in charge, who's the boss. If you had a problem, you knew who to go to in WWF, or hey, can I talk this? WCW sometimes is like, who do I, or sometimes you might be working, you see the board, and you're working this guy, and then you go look again, and it's been changed, and it's another guy. Then 10 minutes later, it's another, it's changed. It's like, I've gotten 3 opponents in 15 minutes, and who am I working? It was just kind of a crapshoot of, as I said, sometimes the inmates were running the asylum.
It sounds a lot like current life, because we know what I'm referring to with the way the WWE is run and the way AEW is run, and I roll it back to letting their biggest star walk out the door and straight into another company.
Yeah. Like I said, I don't know on that one. I still have not seen AEW, so I don't know how that product is. I said I don't watch that much wrestling now. I don't know. It's a different time. It's a different era. Like I said, and Mario's brought it up to a point. I got into it. I was a pro wrestler and all that, and professional wrestling. Now it's sports entertainment.
Why did you, Brian, ultimately decide to kind of walk away from the business then? I know for a long time you did come back and do some shows.
Yeah, I mean, I still do it once in a while. I hate to say it, been in like 40 years, so and I still do. I still run my show here, and people still call me and all that. Again, I'm 60 years old and did it for 40 years, whatever. It's the body can only take so much and all that. And can I still get in there and do the stuff? Yeah. Can I do the stuff that I used to do? No. Um, and if I want to do it, I can do one or two or whatever, but boy, it's going to hurt the next day if I do that big bump.
Mm-hmm. I had a fan on social media when we advertised that you're coming on ask me to ask you about a team that also had a successful tenure in the AWA, the Destruction Crew, but then Enos and Bloom went over to the WWF and were given that Beverly Brothers gimmick, which you worked them on television. Do you have any recollections of them in the WWF in terms of your in-ring experience and why they didn't go farther?
Well, I think at that time too, it was just because they were decent workers. I remember, I want to say, I think a couple times I teamed up Wayne in the AWA, and then they teamed him up with Mike Enos, and then they started that Destruction Crew. Then they went up there. I just think to a point that they had so many tag teams at one time up there, the different ones. And they had kind of look where they could be like, brothers and all that, the Beverly Brothers, they were good workers and all that. Why they didn't necessarily get the push or the elevation, I guess to a point where they were still worried more about the natural disasters, Legion of Doom, Demolition, the Nasty Boys, Steiner, Power and Glory. You had like bigger ones up there, and they were just like down lower on the totem pole to a point where they just never got that push to elevate. They were kind of the same thing. I think in the same group, almost like the Orient Express, which was then basically Tanaka and Diamond, who are also in the AWA, and they shifted them over there. They just that mid card, but it was just hard to break that upper barrier because they had so many of the big boys up there and tag teams.
Do you, in terms of tag teams, because you just mentioned, you've wrestled them all, basically the Bulldogs, Brainbusters, Young Stallions, Powers of Pain, Heart Foundation, Bushwhackers. It goes on and on and on. Do you understand or do you have an opinion on why, for many fans, they really enjoyed tag team wrestling, of which I'm one. I don't think there's, in terms of psychology and entertaining, that there's something better than a good tag team match like back in that golden era. Do you have any thoughts on why we don't seem to have very many, if at all, established teams anymore, and especially in the WWE?
Well, I know they go through different periods, and I know at one time when we had so many of them, Vince wasn't real keen on tag teams, didn't like it, and it's like, and they had great tag teams. You just mentioned a whole bunch of them, and and there's some that you didn't mention and all that stuff. They had great guys that looked together, looked alike, gelled well, wrestled well together. The fans loved them. I just think some reason he's just never really cared for them that way. They always would break them up or whatever, whether, like the Strike Force when they broke up, then the Heart Foundation, if you want to say broke up, or Brett went single, the Rockers, it's just like he would dissolve them and try to get, out of individuals out of that. But I don't know if you've got a good pair or whatever that look, because back even when Vince Senior, some of the great tag teams they had up there, they were built on that from, the Moondogs, the Wild Samoans, Johnson and Atlas, Putski,
Adonis and Murdoch.
Yeah, they had great tag teams. The Blackjacks, the Valiant Brothers, they carried that company along with the heavyweight champions and all that stuff, and they've always had excellent tag teams. Now, I don't. It's almost like, let's grab this guy here from A and grab this guy from E, slap them together, and you're a tag team. And they have no style or rhyme or reason. and we're going to make you guys work. And again, guys work differently. Some, and you look at most of the ones you just mentioned, all that, they all gelled well together. They were just like a well machine that just, move after move and all that stuff. And they worked well. And you don't see that nowadays because they just grab, like one guy from one pile, one guy, you're a tag team. We're going to call you, Smith and Jones or whatever.
Brian, I want to know, I'll just ask the question straight out. Your best WWF party story.
Party story?
Yeah.
One of the ones that just come by just because I like those guys or whatever. We were in like Des Moines, Iowa or something like that. And we just finished and we came back and actually, and they were drinkers, but Mr. Fuji and Hercules and me were at the table and we were drinking. And Fuji was buying drink after drink. And of course, Hercules could pound it. He was a monster. And I was there, and I might have had at the time like 4 or 5 beers or whatever. And my thing was I wasn't drinking a lot because I was leaving and driving to the next town, which was another like someplace in Iowa. And some of these guys were staying, and I know Fuji was like, he was just buying them, like setting them there and all that stuff, boom, 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 and all that. Come on, and I'm like, no, I'm not, and I'm like, Herc, take mine. He's like, okay, boom, and he was just down in the beers and all that. And I just in that, half-hour time or less than that. I mean, I remember Herc had over 20-some beers, and Fuji, was drinking a lot too. And they were, oh, come on, and again, they were nice enough and all that, and I knew them, whatever. But it's like, no, guys, I can't. I'm driving to the next town, and all that stuff. And they're like, oh, come on, you can stay. It's like, no, I'm driving to the next town. But that was one of them. That we did. Again, a lot of times. I'll be honest, a lot of times I didn't do some of the wild things because a lot of times I was traveling with Barry Horowitz. And if you know Barry, he's a straight shooter. He doesn't do any of that stuff. I mean, he's so, and or sometimes maybe with Dusty and all that stuff. So we didn't do a lot of that stuff. We went from town to town and all. Now, there was sometimes we went out. I know at one time I said we were in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan. And I went out with Razor Ramon Scott Hall one time and had a few drinks with him. And then, he's like, oh, come on. I was like, no. I said, I'm driving home. Because that was like the last loop of my thing. And I was just driving straight home from that night. So I wasn't going to. And I can just imagine he probably closed the place down or whatever and all that. Because he was drinking heavily at that time or whatever and all that. But I didn't, I said, just the guys that we, travel with sometimes. You heard about the stories, but I wasn't privy to a lot of them, whatever, because I wasn't around some of those guys. Again, it's by choice. And sometimes, like when I was in WCW, I traveled with Paul Roma. And Paul's not a big partier and drinker and all that stuff. So we, we go back to the hotel and we play pinball all night. Though he cheats. And I'm telling you that. And you can tell him that, yeah, he cheats.
That's tremendous. Well, CRIPPLER, you've been very, very generous with your time tonight. We're approaching the top of the hour, but I want to ask this question because on the Cheap Heat Productions Wrestling Podcast, we've had the pleasure of speaking to many of the greats in terms of star makers, as Bob Cook would call it, enhancement talents, whatever nomenclature you want to put on that. But what are your thoughts in terms of how overdue it is for some form of recognition, be it a Hall of Fame or some other mechanism to recognize the significant contribution that men like yourself made to the business when all of us so fondly remember the syndicated television? And do you think there's ever a possibility to bring back enhancement guys on a regular basis, given what they did?
I don't know if they'll do that now. Like I said, I haven't watched it much, whatever, and all that stuff. So I don't know how it's geared for and all that. Again, different time, different era. Do I wish somehow we'd be recognized? It'd be nice. I think we deserve it. Whatever happened, I don't see it. Is it well deserved for those guys? I think so, because a lot of those guys, we made the stars. And if you ask some of those guys, they'll admit it to a point. Now the higher ups, I don't think they think that. I don't think they think we matter. Again, I don't think they think that.
With the exception of Brett, with the exception of Bret Hart, who's been complimentary of Barry.
No. I mean, but I'm just talking like the higher ups, like a Vince, a Triple H,
Office,
the office people. We don't matter to them. It's like it's like boom. And you go back and you ask some of the guys, like Hacksaw, Jake Rock. We helped made those guys and all that stuff, and they couldn't have been the big stars without us going out there and help creating them and all that stuff. But like I said, as far as like the office guys and the company, there's no money in it for them. They're like, people won't remember them and all that stuff, and yet we're out there. We're on YouTube. We're on it used to be the WWE Network, and then they sold it to Peacock or whatever. Now they have their thing. I mean, I had so many people like, "Hey, I saw your match with da 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 da," and it's on there to view and all that. You can watch it. When they came out with the DVDs, a lot of guys, and at times when people, I still feel like calling up to the office and say, "Hey, where's my residual?" I'm on the Road Warriors DVD. I'm on Mr. Perfect's DVD. I'm on Bret Hart's DVD, Jake the Snake's DVD, Ultimate Warriors DVD. I'm on there and all that stuff. In the matches or whatever. But we, as far as like our circle, whether me, Barry, Dusty, Lombardi, Bob Cook, Mario, Reno, all of that, on that inner circle, we know what we did and what we helped make these guys and all that stuff. That, I guess, that's our own little clique that we were part of.
Well, I think it's with shows like this and the others again that we've had the pleasure to interview. I think you never know, there may be some widespread recognition coming, because fans are so smart these days, and they understand more than they probably would back in the day of just how crucial you were to the product, when, although very financially successful in this day and age, I don't think there's an argument that it was better back then.
No, I mean, I don't know. I said, I haven't really watched much of this. I just, again, like I said, I consider myself pro wrestler and all that, and that's where just the ring psychology and all that stuff. Some of the guys, I had the opportunity to work with, the Don Moroccos, the Paul Orndorffs, just their minds and all that stuff, and how we just did the matches on. I don't see that now. I mean, if I do catch a glimpse of it, I'm watching two guys go out there and hit 37 high spots, and how can I get the crowd to go ooh ah? How can we do one? And instead of telling a story of how the match will go and all that stuff, and I hate to say, like, the good versus evil, getting the people riled up and all that stuff. And can that still work? Yeah, if you got guys that know how to do it.
That's key.
And that's the trouble. I mean, you can still get some of the old guys out there, the Hall of Famers or old timers or whatever, and get in the match. And I know even on my shows where we can still do it and tell a story and get the people riled up, and we don't have to hit 37 high spots. You just got to know how to work the ring psychology to get the people pissed off and get them excited. And that's what a true wrestler does. And that's lost on the young kids. That's why I always say, like, now when New York started, their training thing, they're all cookie cutters. They basically all look the same, wrestle the same and all that. And it's like, okay, how many high spots are we going to hit? I mean, I did watch, oh God, what was it? The one, Royal Rumble, I think it was. And every guy that came in there, it was like, okay, I got to get my 13 spots in. Boom, 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 boom. All of a sudden, then here comes the next guy. Boom, 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 boom. He's got to, and it's just like, instead of just maybe going there and grabbing some guy and just waylaying or, punching, biting, kicking, whatever, and all, instead of like shooting him in the ropes, and then everybody else is just out to the side, letting him get his spots in and all that stuff. But they all got to like shine. I got to get my spots in. You go back and look at old Royal Rumble. That never happened.
No.
Those guys were on each other and all that, telling a story through the thing and all that. So, real quick before you go, did I ever finish telling you the story about the Japan incident?
No.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Please.
No, this is one when we brought up about the Johnny Ace thing where I don't have any use for him. So anyway, when my first tour over in Japan, for All Japan, first night over there wrestling, I'm wrestling Johnny Ace, and we go out and we're having a decent match, whatever. He throws me on the outside. We're fighting on the outside. All of a sudden, gives me a gut punch, suits me up in the suplex, and he goes, "Welcome to Japan, rookie," and suplexes me on the concrete floor. Okay, don't get boom. So next week, because we're working there for a month, different guys and all that. The second week, I was working the Fantastics, great guys, great workers, and I was in the ring with Bobby Fulton, who's a little bit smaller than me and all that. He went to give me a German suplex. Well, I was bigger than him and all that, and I think he had a little hesitant that he didn't think he could get me up. Well, being a wrestler, I'll go up for the move or whatever. So he really got underneath it and jacked me up or whatever. And then I went up real light for him, and it kind of surprised him. He ended up dumping me on my neck, which he thought he broke my neck or whatever, but it didn't. Basically just a stinger, kind of sore neck or whatever, all that. And then going into the third week. So I had a sore neck or whatever and all that, but I'm still wrestling because that's what you got to do. And whoever I had to work with, I just said, hey, the neck's sore, real stiff or whatever. I said, whatever you do, I said, no suplexes or slams. Okay. Never had a problem. We're in the third week, towards the end. Who do I got to work like towards the end? Johnny Ace again. Tell him, neck sore. A little bit screwed up. No suplexes, no slams. Okay. We go out there, we're wrestling, having a decent match. He throws me on the outside. He goes to suplex me on the outside. I block it. Goes again, tries to suplex me. I block. I said, dude, I got a sore neck. I told you, no suplexes or slams. He goes, suplex. Goes for it again. I block it. And give him a stiff shot. I went and got a chair. Beat the living daylights out of him where he was almost screaming. And I go, now we can go back in the ring and finish this, or we can end it right out here. Go back in the ring. We finish it. Boom, boom, boom. Do the match. Come back to the locker room. We go at it to a point where we come at it. We're fighting back there and all that stuff. And then I'm like, listen here. And I go, I told you. He's like, oh, yeah, I'm calling for moves and you won't do it. I go, no, I got it. Next thing I know, Abdul the Butcher and Stan Hansen had to step in and separate us or whatever, because we were going to go at it and all that stuff. And we were going at it or whatever now. And that's why basically I have no use for him. And the best comment was, Abby, walked away and goes, that little white boy ain't going to take no shit from him. And that was because he was kind of up there. So that was like one of the funny things. Then way back when he became one of the head of talent relations, and people go, hey, why don't you go back up to WWE? I go, that ain't happening. That's when he was in charge or whatever and all that. So from that time, I never had any use for him whatsoever, and how he weaseled his way into office in WCW and WWF. He's another one that I have no use for. And then we saw what happened to him, where his abuse of power and all that. So he's another one I have no use for. And then the funny thing is later on, a good friend of mine who's Andy Shane, who's good friends with Kurt Beyer and at that time Dick Beyer, the Destroyer. Even the story had filtered in that, even Dick used to go, hey, I heard your boy got into a face. It was like a legend thing going on there. Like we got into a locker room fight or whatever back there. And I go, yeah, it happened, whatever, and all that stuff. But that's my All Japan Johnny Ace story. That's why there's no love lost between us two.
Well, I can certainly understand that. Unprofessional.
Yeah, but I said that was where, even too, like the first one when I was the first night, when he did the suplex on the concrete, like, and I don't, hey, let me know what's coming or something like that. Just don't, throw it out there. Hey, welcome to Japan, rookie. And it's like, all right.
The only person I've met through this realm that likes him is Bushwhacker Luke, because I think they train together, etc.
Well, yeah, and he was the sheep herder's flank boy or whatever. We always used to call him his lackey and all that stuff. So yeah, but but and I love Luke or whatever and all that, but I still have no use for Johnny Ace. It's like, yeah, that's all you're good for, was to carry their flag.
Well, Crippler, we certainly appreciate you coming back to this podcast. Your experiences and stories are extremely entertaining. Can I ask, do you have anything that you'd like to promote at this time, or where fans can keep in touch with you on social media?
Not yet. I know we'll probably do another show sometime in the summer again. It's usually July or August. I haven't sat down yet with our stadium to figure it out yet or whatever. But if we do, it'll be number 24, Clash 24. And I might, who knows? I know you're getting our buddy Mario to come up to the Great White North or whatever. Who knows? I might even be able to get him to do a road trip back to Indiana.
Yes, sir.
And all that stuff. Even though he goes, no. I go, Mario, come on. I know he'll do it just for the road trip or whatever.
Mario coming out of retirement, I think, was one of the most read articles last week on Sportskeeda. I was informed, and I was also informed that it was the third most viewed on the day of all sports in the world. Well, there you go.
And it's fitting to a point. I mean, I can only, maybe a handful of actually wrestlers, when they retire.
You can ask Brian that question from Stephen Dillon there. Have you been following Ahmed Johnson on our podcast, Brian?
I saw some of that. I don't know. I haven't caught the whole gist of it yet, or who's doing what, or this, or something like calling them out or whatever, all that.
I can summarize it for you that Booker T pretty much trashed Ahmed on his massive WWE product program. Ahmed didn't like it. He wanted to respond. We gave him the platform to do so because he doesn't have a podcast. He doesn't have the WWE machine behind him. And then they just kind of went back and forth. But I think it was important to offer Ahmed somewhere to talk.
I mean, there's always a beef between somebody. I guess there's his side, and the truth. So I mean, and I don't know Ahmed. I was gone from there. I think when he was up there, Booker T. I worked him in WCW and all that stuff. So that goes back to, I hate to say, like the British Bulldogs, they terrorize everybody. A lot of people don't have anything good to say about them. I can knock wood, and before I got along with them, they never did anything. No jokes, no pranks, no ribs, no nothing. Always nice to me. Had decent matches with them in the ring. And I know, Dynamite can be a real asshole. I saw him do it. He never did it to me and all that. So, and again, I won't, I'm not, by no means do I condone any of the stuff that he did, because I said some of the ribs that some of those guys did or whatever, but I guess I was fortunate or whatever, and he was one of the guys in my career, 40-year career, only twice have I ever taken a superplex off the top turnbuckle. And one was the Dynamite Kid, and he protected me all the way and never felt a thing, where we both stood up there and boom did it. And the other one is Barry Windham. Mm-hmm. And out of that's, I've had a guy say, hey, I want to do that, but no way in hell am I letting you do it. It's just that thing of not trust and have, you're going to protect me and all that. And he did it to me, and Barry Windham are the only two guys that ever superplexed me off the top thing or whatever, and I was totally protected by both of them.
Nice. There was one very good quote that came out of the show the other night, and I'll tell you what it was. Ahmed said that Booker T couldn't sweep the floor with me if I handed him a broom. That was fantastic.
Again, that's it's I hate to see that because they were both stars in their own right or whatever, but obviously there's something brewing between them or whatever, and all that stuff, and there's a lot of that in the business. I mean, it's Jack knows it, being in the business and promoting it, and you probably interview a lot of cutthroats. Like I said, one of the biggest things. Quote: There's a lot of friendships and friends in here, but really true blue friends that a person has in the wrestling business is probably less than a handful. That they're there whenever you need them, that you can call them or whatever. But everybody, oh yeah, I'm friends with him. But really true blue friends that if you're in trouble or you need something, it's far between. And so many times guys will stab you in the back or cut your throat. And all that, I saw that, a lot of times up there.
Well, for our dealings with Ahmed, Tony found him to be nothing but a gentleman and a class act, and he for the final word on this, whatever it was between him and Booker. Ahmed never resorted to name calling and was very professional in his presentation. So I have a heck of a lot of respect for him.
And that's somebody like that is like, dude, what do you get out of it by, like I said, like, and I don't know if Booker T's by degrading, name calling, all. It's like, hey, if there's something in there or whatever, speak the truth. There's somebody's gonna know what's what or whatever and all that stuff, and it's just like. But again, I don't know exactly what's in it, so I don't really want to comment on it. I mean, like I said,
there's a lot to catch up on. You could.
I don't know him, and that we weren't there at the same time or whatever. And again, having worked with Booker T, I always got along with him or whatever and all that stuff. But again, are we friends or friendly? I knew him, whatever, say hi, but I'm not. So I'm Switzerland. I'm not taking either side.
That's a good place to be.
Yeah.
But I have followed it or whatever to see who's making snarky remarks or whatever and all that stuff. So it does have interest or whatever and all that to see, kind of like what goes on, just like the same thing, I guess, there was a time when Hogan and Beefcake were, and I don't know if they saw it, they had a riff.
Yeah.
At one time, and, this and that, so they all go through that one way or the other.
Indeed. Well, fans, I think we have come to the end of another stellar edition of the Cheap Heat Productions Pro Wrestling Podcast. Want to thank once again CRIPPLER Costello for his time tonight in terms of going into his career. We're definitely going to keep in touch and potentially have you back again, Brian, if you're so willing, because again, 40 years in the business, that's a lot of ground to cover. So we really appreciate that. And fans, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, click the notifications in order to stay up to date with all the great content coming in 2024 for Cheap Heat Productions. I'll give the last word to Maurice before we sign off.
Yeah, I'm just going to thank Brian for his time. Hopefully we'll get him back up before his next event. And just before we wrap up, Jack, there's one last comment there that I think is brilliant.
Oh, yes. This is the highly intelligent wrestling fans that follow Cheap Heat Productions.
Well, maybe
Good night,
maybe
guys.
he'll chime in sometime or whatever and all that. You can get him.
We did. He was invited the other day, but he didn't show up, unfortunately. So,
well, we shall see, fans. This is a continuing story, and we appreciate all the fans of Cheap Heat Productions, the wrestling podcast, and all the other content on the channel, and we will see you next time. Thanks again to the Crippler.